And welcome to this week's episode of the Combat Chat podcast. This week we're going to be going over the previous week's main card. This is the fight night between Fiziev and Gamrot at the UFC Apex. It was not an amazing card. It was okay. I don't think I got any picks right.
No,
If I'm honest,
you had a couple in there.
I know you had quite a few. Overall, it wasn't an unimpressive card, but it wasn't how I wanted to see it go. You know, there were lots of submissions, lots of finishes. A few beatings, but regardless, it just wasn't what we want to see from a card with names like that. And I feel like there might have been a few missed matchups. I don't know if you'd agree.
Yeah, I think throughout the card there was a bit of a theme of some some bad matchups, maybe just from how the fighters went. But at the end of the day, the prelims actually did start off okay. It was just the main card for me was a bit iffy. I think getting into the main fight, the Ricardo Ramos fight, I think that was a bit of a jump too early for him. Just Charles Jourdain is an elite fighter.
So it's really interesting. So going into the fight, Ricardo Ramos said that he wanted to wrestle. He said that he wanted to show his wrestling, which really quite surprised me because I think that with Ricardo Ramos, although yes he is good on the ground and you could argue that on paper he might be better than Charles Jourdain on the ground, I don't think that was the right way for him to go about it. And looking at how the fight went, because Charles Jourdain, he's got some very good jiu-jitsu, but I wouldn't say he showed anything particularly impressive. He wasn't showing really technical high-level jiu-jitsu. He just showed that by being persistent with going for that guillotine, which he has pulled off quite a few times. I think he might have pulled it off in his last fight, would have been.
I can't remember off the top of my head, but yeah, maybe.
Being persistent with that guillotine, he was able to secure it, and it was. Unfortunately, I wasn't really what I want to see from either fighter. Really, I want to see a bit more on the feet because they're both very high level on the feet. Very big jump up though. Charles Jourdain, very big jump up. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think overall, I mean, for how it lasted, it was a decent fight. I did think Ricardo Ramos came out looking a bit more technical on the feet, through, I think, 3 head kicks off the bat. Obviously, we know how much of a wild man he is, and I think it was a bit more of mistakes on his end, being a bit too persistent with that first takedown. I mean, the guillotine was threatened before he got it, wasn't it? Like he had it in and then he got out and then he still stayed on that single leg and it ended up getting him put in that guillotine. And there's not much you can do. It's not a nice submission to be caught in.
It's no, definitely not, and it's really interesting because we look at Ricardo Ramos. He's got the tied most spinning elbow knockouts in the UFC, which is pretty cool to be fair.
It's a cool stat to have.
It's a cool stat to have, really, and maybe should use for a spinning elbow. But no, overall, I think Charles Jourdain, he did look good, and I think they both didn't look too bad. It didn't really last long enough to make too much of a comment, really. But overall, it's a big step up. I don't think him trying to wrestle was the right call. In my opinion, I don't think that was the right way to get into the fight. I don't believe it was his last fight. He got a submission. I think it might have been a few fights back in 2020.
That was the
two.
Lando Venata fight, I think, where
Okay.
I think he was like pulling his trousers down as he was choking him out. Like he had his trousers around his waist, trousers, shorts, whatever.
Yeah, same thing. Really, both cover you. So yeah, but yeah. I mean, overall, there's not really a lot to say about that. Charles Jourdain, he's very, very impressive. He's a fighter you want to see fight on the feet because he's just so exciting on the feet.
Yeah.
And he's so aggressive and he's so technical and he's a very, very good fighter. We need to see a lot of fighters from Canada, really. If you really think about it, I know we have like GSP, but other than talking about potentially the GOAT, not really.
I mean, he even said it was in his pre-fight press conference before the fight. He was like, people say there's not great fighters coming out of Canada because everyone's trying to compare them to Georges St. Pierre, and no one is probably ever going to live up to that sort of level from there. But there's great fighters coming from there. Hakeem Dawodu, Charles Jourdain. There's plenty more that I can't remember off the top of my head as well. But they've got decent fighters coming out of that, and he's one of them. And he got a great finish. He's had some real good competitive fights recently. Like the Nathaniel Wood fight off the top of my head was a great fight, and we know how good Nathaniel Wood is. So yeah, I mean he could do with maybe even a ranked opponent now. I think what is it featherweight, isn't it? So yeah, I think get him in against maybe ranked number 15 or just outside, and we'll see a great matchup there again.
I think that is a logical next step. I really do. We look at who he's been fighting. He's fighting these top fighters in that non-ranked
Yeah.
setting, it's only logical that he moves up.
Mm.
And the featherweight division is a division which I think his fighting style he'd do very well in.
Yeah.
You know, somebody who's powerful like that. A lot of these guys there are a lot of technical strikers in that division, and the power he has, there are a few featherweights he could definitely put out.
And I think you can see him actually getting better as well. Like his takedown defense is really good. His submissions are getting there, and he's as dangerous as anyone on the feet. So I think maybe his fighting style maybe would kind of hinder him at the top level because he tries to put on a show a bit too much maybe against these top fighters at featherweight. They're so poised, like you see the Toporias and the Max Holloways and how they fight, and you know they will cause these wild strikers like Yair Rodriguez, and I'm not comparing him to Yair Rodriguez, but just that same sort of wild man that he is, and but he'll have some fun fights in this featherweight division.
And seeing his grappling today as well, I mean, seeing his grappling was very today. I did watch about today.
On the weekend, yeah.
But no, seeing his grappling, it does show that it does always. It's nice to see when you see an attribute of a fighter, when you see a style of the fight, which you don't see very often. It does really show their potential. Because when you only see somebody, you know, knocking out, not as if that's all he does because he does everything, but when you see him get these more and more of these submissions in, and more of his grappling in, it does really show where his potential is at and how he is, like you said, developing as a fighter. He is growing as a fighter. He's looking better and better each fight, and overall, it's really exciting. It's something to definitely watch out for.
Yeah, well, jumping into the next fight on the card, Brian Battle versus AJ Fletcher. Obviously, AJ Fletcher started the fight very well. It was one of the more entertaining fights. Didn't last too long. What were your thoughts on the contest?
So it's a really interesting fight. Brian Battle, his stature is very, very tall. In contrast to AJ Fletcher, and I did feel like AJ Fletcher was gonna wrestle, and but looking at Brian Battle, something which I wasn't too certain on was how he'd be able to defend his takedowns, how he'd be able to stop his takedowns, but he did an excellent job of doing so.
Yeah.
And in these clinches, he was really able to cause some damage. That front kick keeping me at bay. It's interesting because you look at Brian Battle, but these front kicks are like jabs. They're keeping him away.
Yeah.
He's using that front kick like a jab, which is very impressive, really, because there aren't loads and loads of fighters who are able to do that. But overall, it's a very hard matchup for AJ Fletcher. He's very stocky
Yeah.
that division, but he just hasn't got a reach.
I actually do think he's a decent little fighter. Though obviously dropping him with the elbow in the first round, probably won the first round because of that exchange. But you know, Brian Battle, he's shown nasty chokes before. Maybe not the best wrestler, but we spoke about the possibility of him getting a choke because of his length. And when you're fighting a guy that tall, it's easy for them to sort of kind of wrap up those submissions. But overall, I was very impressed with his performance. You mentioned the kicks. I thought his distance management was excellent. You know, that's probably the best we've seen from him, having the 10-inch reach advantage as well. So overall, I thought he fought a really good fight.
It's one of these things AJ Fletcher did so impressively to get in close, and when he was getting in close and when he was taking him down, he was doing so good. With Brian Battle, his jiu-jitsu, when you're that tall and you're being taken down, being good on the ground, having that grappling defense and offense as well, is so impressive. Is so beneficial to being a fighter of that stature. At the end of the day, it's very hard for AJ Fletcher to do anything on the ground when you're grappling with someone like that, because in my opinion there's that elbow which, like you said, did win in the first round. However, it's hard to get in close to someone like Brian Battle, and even in the stage he's a dangerous person. The closer you get to him, if he's fighting on the outside and he's keeping you at bay, and when you are striking him, when you are exchanging with him, you're fighting near the cage, you know, and it's in that clinch. It's a very hard fight for AJ Fletcher. He's so stocky, but that reach advantage and just his distance management. Brian Battle's distance management is so high level. His post-fight interview, was very interesting.
Is that like, did he say something about grappling? I can't remember.
He said a lot about grappling, and he really believed in his grappling ability, which is interesting. You know, about 15 minutes and 25 minutes. So it'd be interesting to see how he fights in the future if there is a lot more grappling involved, because to see somebody like that grapple, somebody who you typically think of as I typically think of as a stand-up fighter,
more of a striker,
to see how they fight in the future with their grappling. This is somebody who can submit you. This is somebody who is good on the ground. It's very interesting. It's a good fight overall.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. You know, it would have been nice to see it go a bit longer, but it's a very fast card in the sense
Yeah.
there are a lot of finishes.
Yeah. Getting into the next fight, this is the one that I wouldn't say put a dampener on the card because everyone likes seeing finishes in this sport, but I just feel like you said, I think before we start the pod, you said something about the fights in the Apex. Like when it's a beating like that, it feels quite eerie, doesn't it? Like it's a bit hard to watch at times when it's a fight like that, and videos of her daughter in the crowd crying her eyes out afterwards. It's not nice to see. Um, but how impressed were you with Marina Rodriguez and the fight overall?
Marina Rodriguez, she's notorious for her Muay Thai. It's so high level. I think is she a champion?
Yeah,
Is a champion, I
yeah.
think.
I think I've heard like 10 times. I think I read
Oh,
somewhere.
10 times. I didn't know
Yeah,
about
I might
that.
be wrong, but I think I read that somewhere.
The Muay Thai is so high level, and Michelle Watson Gomez, she's a very, very high level fighter. However, the size difference is beyond ridiculous, really. I mean, I personally believe that this was probably the biggest mismatch on the card. Not from necessarily a stylistic perspective, but just as in, I don't want to say ability standpoint, although you could say that potentially.
You probably should say that, to be fair.
But just the way Michelle Watson Gomez, the only I think the strategy for her was wrestle. And against a fighter like Mariana Rodriguez, it's the clinch work which really caused the damage.
It was brutal.
The elbows, the knees, the strikes in general. Her face was opened up very early, and it was after a certain point, it was just very uncomfortable to watch.
Yeah.
About 3-4 minutes in, maybe even sooner potentially. She did get beaten very badly. And it's a shame, really.
And she didn't really land any offense at all. She was kind of backing up the whole time and just surviving, wasn't she?
And that's the thing, the distance management and just the aggression. There's not a lot you can really do in that situation.
No.
Because you get close, you get elbowed, you get kneed, and the knees in the clinch were so damaging. Those body knees, there's only so many of those you can take before you physically can't go on anymore. I know, I think it was the second round, or maybe the end of the first round, where she took, I think, 2 or 3 knees in the clinch, right side of the octagon, and she just dropped to the floor.
Yeah, I think that was at the start of the second or end of the first.
It was one of the two, and it just shows really just how damaging it was. And the stoppage, like 20 seconds, to check the eye.
No, yeah, just before the end of the first round.
Yeah. But
Bit of a strange call, wasn't it?
it's one of those things. Like I think at that point you either have to look at potentially stopping it, or maybe just letting go for another 20 seconds. Gave her a breather.
Yeah.
But overall didn't really do much, I don't think.
No, I think that's maybe why the ref chose to do it. I mean, maybe he was even watching that like, oh, I gotta give this girl a little break, check on that eye, see if she's all okay to carry on, maybe.
Overall, though, I wouldn't say that's bad reffing, because if you actually watch the ref, which I know isn't something which you're always watching when you're watching the fights, but watching the ref, he was paying so much attention to the damage which Michelle was taking. And I think that the fact that he let it go on for as long as it was, although it was very, very unpleasant, Michelle was still fighting.
Yeah.
Admittedly, not doing very much whatsoever.
Watching this sport, you're going to get fights that someone gets beat up that bad. And obviously, we're not here saying the fight should have been stopped or anything because she was fighting back. But, we're fans of this sport. Of course, we like seeing brutal fights. But, there's just something about the fights like that where there's just nothing coming back. And it reminded me a bit of the Anthony Smith Glover Teixeira fight where obviously this was more in the clinch instead of on the ground. But it was like 2 rounds of just non-stop kicks and knees and punches to the head.
Well, it's interesting because I know that they're slightly different injuries, but you look at Wonderboy Thompson and Kevin Holland, and you look at the arm, and the fact that he just took kick after kick after kick. He might have been throwing occasionally, but he was being thrown roundhouse kicks at him constantly, and then obviously Kevin Holland's he's injured, so he can't carry on. At that point, do you think maybe the corner should be like, this is enough, you're going to get finished?
Yeah, I see what you mean because like in the Kevin Holland fight and in this fight, after the end of the certain rounds where they were getting beaten up, I mean, even as the cornerman, you can see your fighter's not winning this fight, and it's precious in this fight game. You haven't got long to do what you want to do in this fight game. It's a short career sport because you can't take these punches to the head, and you know, maybe I think MMA is where this is a bit different from boxing. It's more of a tough man sport still, I think. Obviously, people don't like to label it as that, is because we like to think it's martial artists, but let's be real, a lot of these guys like, are just people who've had rough upbringings and fought their whole lives, and that's why they're in this sport. And I don't think it's normalised for a corner to throw in a towel where a fighter would probably rather. I mean, a lot of them use hits. I'd rather die than my corner throwing a towel or the ref stop the fight. They'd rather be knocked out cold, wouldn't they?
So it sounds it's almost stigmatized to say this enough. Obviously, with boxing, we see it a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely.
Where I'd say a little bit more, a lot more. Where the corner's like, all right, well, it's time to throw him a towel. This isn't going anywhere. With MMA, it's always a matter of you get to that corner and we're like, all right, well, we need to do this now. We need to do that now.
I think it's only happened twice. Towels in MMA.
And it's one of these things because it's we try to, like you said, describe it as martial arts, which is what it is. However, there's also an element of it where it's you're not where you're considered not tough by throwing in that towel, by putting a stop to that fight. And it's a shame really, because I think sometimes, you know, in a fight like this is, I say that there are often examples of times in which there is a way to potentially recover it. There is a way to potentially go out and win the next round or finish your opponent. But in a fight like this, she was very damaged, and you could make the argument she was injured to an extent in which she wasn't going to recover, because the fact that they're stopping it 20 seconds before it to give you a check, they're not doing that unless it's really bad.
Yeah.
And I think that it looked really bad, and the refs saw it was really bad, and that's why I thought it was such good reffing. I mean, yes, it's frustrating. It stops the momentum, it stops the flow. But if you're having to stop it 20 seconds beforehand, everyone knows what the time is.
Yeah.
And it's one of these things, maybe it's something which might need to change. We don't want to see it all the time.
I think in maybe like 20 years' time it will be different, but I think for a while the sport's kind of stuck like this.
And it's not necessarily always a bad thing, because a lot of the time we do see these amazing comebacks, but that was beyond a 10-8.
Yeah.
That would, if it even if it were to go to the decision, even if Michelle Watson and Gomez were to survive another 2 rounds, I genuinely reckon it would be a 10-8 each round.
Yeah, probably.
There was no way that was ever gonna.
Yeah, well, touching on the co-main event now, Bryce Mitchell obviously comes in holding his Bibles, singing his heart out. Danny Ige, you know, comes on smoke every time. Like, he just wants to throw down, and he started off the fight very well. Bryce Mitchell's grappling came through in the end. He couldn't get him down towards the start of the fight. He was really struggling. I thought he might be in trouble for a while, but, you know, he pulled through, and he can really battle adversity. You know, he really believes he's got a God on his side, and he fights like it, doesn't he?
He believes a lot. He believes a lot. He believes a lot of. He's an interesting person.
He just believes a lot, doesn't he?
And it's one of those things, like you said, you know, these backgrounds they come from. It's very interesting. You don't get that in boxing, you know. I know a lot of them come from tough, and a lot of them come from poverty, but these guys they come from something else.
Arkansas.
Yeah, Arkansas. Yeah. Very very proud of it too.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, this Bryce Mitchell fight, it's interesting. Dan Ige on the feet, his boxing, it was crisp, rapid. The one good thing about the Apex is that you hear everything, every strike landing, and these flurries are so damaging. And you look at that, I think it was was it a straight for right eye?
Yeah, I think, what was it, like a left hook that sort of raised it, I think?
It was there was a combination. I know it's a combination because these boxing combinations.
The way he goes to the body and up high afterwards, he's so clean with it.
And it's one of these things. It's Dan E8 on the feet. On the feet, he is such a dangerous opponent. We look at Bryce Mitchell. Bryce Mitchell's wrestling was beyond impressive. His shooting is just so technical, and it's not as if it's not as if it just happens. But the way it gets set up, it is always set up. Although, in fairness, one thing to say about Dan Ige is the way his balance is on the feet. It's so impressive. His takedown defense, I think it was a single leg they attempted. Yeah. And he's walking for about 3 or 4 seconds.
Yeah, bounce on one leg.
And it's so impressive to do that against somebody like Bryce Mitchell, somebody who is at high level at wrestling. On the feet, I think Danny Gay was doing bits. He was landing a good few straights. Yeah. Bryce Mitchell, in fairness, but the grappling offense was so impressive. That jiu-jitsu is so high level. He's a black belt, isn't he?
Yeah, definitely.
So
I'm not sure, but he surely is.
I'm fairly confident it's a black belt as he walked in. But yeah, no. So Bryce Mitchell, really overall, just very very impressive performance. I don't know if I'd. Yeah, you'd have to say dominant.
Yeah, in the end, probably.
But it's one of those things. It's very hard to do anything against that. Dan Ige on the ground is so good defensively.
Yeah.
Because somebody that high level jiu-jitsu, if he wanted to, if he had any worse grappling defense, he would have been submitted.
Definitely. He was in some bad positions, had his back taken a few times, didn't he?
And it does just really show the fight in him. And he's it's a Dan Ige decision. It's not super uncommon, but it's I would have liked to have seen it a little bit more on the feet to see what Bryce Mitchell would have done. I think that Dan Ige on the feet was doing so well.
He had his number, and Bryce didn't want that straight away, did he?
But something which is good about the Apex is obviously we can always hear the corner anyway.
Yeah.
We can always hear it. But Danny Ige's corner, the way that they're talking to him about throwing the I think it was the strikes he was throwing. They were saying stop throwing the specific strike because this is how he's shooting for you.
He's dipping under,
and it's just so clever. And the coaching, and I think the code words as well. I think I might have in Bryce Mitchell's corner.
Yeah, I love the code words they use. Yeah.
But even then, just the jiu-jitsu is the terms they're using is so technical.
Yeah, definitely.
They know exactly what leg to move when. They know exactly what. There's certain terms I don't know.
I think that is one of the only good things about the Apex is just you get to hear that detailed corner advice, don't you?
And it's really interesting because it does just show how high level these coaches are. We talk about how high level these fighters are. These high level fighters always have the highest level corners. And it does really show, and there's often always that trait in which, certain fighters do come from certain gyms who are very successful because certain gyms do just do it better than others, certain coaches do just do it better than others. And coaching is so interesting, especially in MMA because MMA is such an evolving sport. People are trying new things all the time. Everyone does something different.
Yeah. Yeah, so basically, both of us impressed. Just Bryce Mitchell's jiu-jitsu on display once again. Obviously, we've seen how dominant he is with that. Obviously, the tough loss to Poirier was one that kind of put like a bump in the road. But that's how you come back, isn't it? With such an impressive performance. So yeah, both impressive him. Getting on to the main event, obviously, just going to take a little bit of time here. Not just brush over it because the injury just ruined it, didn't it? That would put a real downer on the card. The first round kicked off with a bang. Fiziev looking so strong on the feet, and his takedown defense is so impressive. Probably took the first round, but man, the injury, I was so annoyed. That fight was going to be so good.
It's one of those things that when you have an injury like this, it is a real shame because the first round of the fight was so exciting.
Yeah.
And it looks as if it's about to be however many rounds of just pure banger. It really does. And to see an injury like that, especially when Fiziev is doing what he does best, is just so disappointing. Gamrot in the post-fight interview was talking about how they were working on how to defend Fiziev's kicks. And it's really disappointing because if Gamrot shoots for a takedown, there aren't many fighters who are able to defend that. Because his wrestling is so high level, and I feel like with Gamrot, in a bizarre way, he's very new generation.
Yeah.
He's
for an older fighter as well. Obviously, he's not that old, but he competes with like Arman Tsarukyan the way he did and stuff like that. It just shows how evolved he is for this level of the sport and at lightweight as well. Just it's so impressive.
I think with Gamrot as well, he's just so versatile.
Yeah, definitely.
He's got a bit of everything really, and it's really interesting. And looking at Fiziev, it is a real shame because we all really like Fiziev, and his stand-up is so good. His Muay Thai, we've got a lot of Muay Thai-based fighters on this card.
Yeah.
And it's a shame really because these kicks are damaging. And the way he's able to throw them, he can throw anything at you really. He has all the tools to his disposal, and the fact that he was showing the takedown defense is beyond impressive. I mean, if you're stuffing me takedowns, if you're defending me takedowns, if you're keeping on the feet and you're doing well on the feet, you want the fight to go on because for Fiziev, that was exactly what he needed. He needed to be able to keep on the feet. Gamrot is still dangerous on the feet, but he's not as dangerous as Fiziev.
Yeah, and I think the main thing I took away from it is you have a guy like Fiziev to be that good at Muay Thai and stand up, to be defending the takedowns for Gamrot, who was able to take down Arman Tsuyukian, able to submit Jeremy Stevens so easy, and various other fighters. To have someone like him that good at defending takedowns and probably one of the best stand up fighters, probably top 10 maybe even in the UFC, that is just so gutting for him to blow out his knee, probably out for about 9 months to a year, after coming off the tough loss to Justin Gaethje. It just really, really put a dampener on the card for me, and it's a fighter at that lightweight sort of ranking where they should be getting these fights like the Chandler fights and the Dustin Poirier fights, and it's just another guy who is sort of out of the way to fight one of those guys.
It's a shame, really, because it would have been probably one of the, well, fighting on the main card, definitely. And he was looking so impressive. And to have a fight stop like that is always devastating, especially when on the main card it was, without a doubt, in my opinion, the best fight
Yeah,
up until that
matchup,
point.
definitely.
But even then, even with a stoppage, it was still, in my opinion, probably the most exciting fight.
Yeah, the first round was so technical, wasn't it?
And it's one of those things that's a real shame, but hopefully he recovers well.
Yeah,
And hopefully he comes back stronger, because I feel like that is just so unfair.
yeah. I mean, all the wishes go out to Fiziev. Hopefully, speedy recovery, and we get to see him fighting again soon.
Definitely so.
So obviously, we don't have a card to talk about next week. I think the next fight night is October 7th or 8th. Bobby Green versus Dawson. We'll break that down next week. But there's just a few news points we want to touch on. Um, Obviously, a lot of massive sort of matchups announced recently, and Kobe Covington and Leon Edwards just been announced. Yuri Prochazka, Alex Pereira, Tony Ferguson, and Paddy Pimblett. Obviously, all very interesting fights. I just want to touch on one thing that I saw brought up on a YouTube video somewhere else, and I just wanted to get your opinion on it. Obviously, Leon Edwards hasn't fought in a while. But just the possibility of Kobe Covington becoming welterweight champion and sort of where that leaves the division, because he wants to go up and fight Sean Strickland. He said recently he'd be interested in fighting Islam Makhachev. So, for people like Bilal Muhammad, where does this sort of lead the division, and how do you think it will affect that welterweight division?
So it's really interesting. Kobe Covington fighting Leon Edwards. Great matchup. And I think logically it is probably one of the best matchups you could do in that welterweight division. Leon Edwards, something which I thought was very impressive with him is, other than overall his just general stand-up fighting ability, is that his wrestling defense, and as well as that, it's just wrestling in general. Who takes down Usman?
Yeah, he was the first man to take down Usman.
Quite
Well, Kobe didn't, but he did really. But
And this is the thing: if Usman is such a high-level wrestler, he did very well against Usman with the wrestling. On the wrestling perspective, I think this would be really interesting to see a test of Edwards. Obviously, he has been tested, but to see if he can keep it up. Because when we think of these British fighters, we don't think of wrestlers really.
no.
And I think this could potentially shake up the division.
Do you think it would be bad for the division?
I don't think it will necessarily be bad for the division. I think that there's always somebody who's going to come along and always going to test it, and you need the division to be tested
Yeah.
continuously. And I think that Leon Edwards is at a stage in his career where he is so high level, he's got so much momentum going. We need to keep it tested. I don't think it's bad for the division. I think that the division itself is stacked for a start.
But I think that it could kind of put the division in a freeze, in the sense that Kobe Covington for me isn't the type of guy to, fight all the top contenders once he wins the bout. He's probably going to take another year off. He hasn't fought for a year and a half. He's going to go on every podcast that you can think of. He might even come on ours. You never know. But that was a joke. He would never do that. But yeah, where he'll go on sort of like a press tour. Do you know what I mean? I don't know where it would leave the division for the contenders.
So it's one of these things. Do you think the UFC would allow that? Just a general question, because
I think he's one of those polarizing characters where they kind of just let you run free and build as much chaos as you can. Kobe Chaos Covenant on for a reason. and the next fight maybe he has against Sean Strickland or a mega fight with Islam Makhachev, instead of poor old Belal Muhammad who's on a 50 fight win streak and can't get a title shot. Like I don't know where it would really leave the sort of the Shav. Is he going to fight Shavkat Rakhmonov? I don't think so.
Well, it's one of these things. I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing. I can see where you're coming from. I do understand with the activity because you don't want a champion who's inactive
Yeah.
in the division. That's not what you want. You don't want there to be a title which no one's fighting for, unless they were to have him vacate the title, which I suppose when you say that he's a polarizing character, there's a possibility that they would just let him have it. You'd like to think not,
Yeah.
but at the same time, it's business at the end of the day, and a capability champion, I imagine, does sell quite well. Uh,
Definitely.
I think it's good for the division because, in my opinion, I think that Leon Edwards, how he's performing at the moment, just the level he's at, I can't see many people taking that belt off him,
No.
if very few at all, and I think that it makes the logical step. It would be very frustrating if he were to lose and keep the belt, but I think that this is a good fight for him, and I think that this division just needs to keep having these fights.
Yeah, I think I've been a Kobe fan for years, so I've always been excited to possibly see him as champion. And Leon Edwards isn't the most active champion, it's been 9 months since he last fought as well. But I think there's more of a chance of him fighting these other guys. Just another thing I want to briefly touch on. Obviously, Israel Adesanya in the news lately, been pleaded guilty to drink driving. That's not really the fact I want to talk about. More the fact that, a lot of the UFC commentators, not going to name any names, a certain English UFC commentator and the other guy on his co-host on his podcast defending Israel Adesanya in a way. And I just think for a guy like Israel Adesanya, that's just such a bad look. And, it happened before his fight. Like, that's a bad look on the UFC, and to have people sort of sticking up for him and sort of making excuses, I just thought we should at least bring it up a little bit, not hide from it.
I think with the UFC, I've been really, you can't advocate this kind of behaviour, you can't accept it, you can't just say, well, it is what it is.
Yeah.
You can't really just brush it under. At the end of the day, with the UFC is a organisation which I would like to say simply tends to appeal to more mature audiences. It's not like other sport organisations. It's not like football where you have kids as young as 4 watching it all the time. You do get that obviously, but if you look at a lot of the way which fighters conduct themselves in press conferences, it's not always appropriate for all audiences. I think though
That's a good point.
it's something which you can't defend at all
No.
really. And I think that when you're an athlete and when you are a role model, because you are going to be a role model to a lot of 13, 14, 15-year-old martial artists, people coming up, fans, a role model to adults as well, you can't be doing these things.
No.
And you can't have it just be something which happens because it's a very big mistake. I'm sure at the time, or I'm sure that it wasn't premeditated. I'm sure it was just a stupid mistake. However, at the same time, you can't defend it. It's not something which you can accept. It's not acceptable for athletes or anybody whatsoever to do this.
Yeah.
And it's not something you can defend at all, really. You can't shy away from it. It is a real shame, and it does show them out of personality, but you can't accept it because they're a name. You can't accept it because they sell fights.
Yeah, and that's all we really got to talk about this week. We're going to be breaking down that card next week, and we'll do it a bit more in depth because we haven't got a previous card to talk about as well. But make sure to follow us on YouTube, share us around on Spotify, rate us 5 stars. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at the moment as well, the Combat Chatters podcast. We're uploading loads more on there, so with help with someone else, it's popping off there right now, putting a lot of fight news, etc. on there. So yeah, make sure to follow us there, and we hope you enjoyed the podcast.